Seoul is considering strong steps in case Pyongyang launches an ICBM. The measures include deployment of U.S. strategic military assets. Japan approves textbooks with historic distortion related to South Korean territory and Tokyo's wartime atrocities. Seoul's government urges the country to make necessary corrections. Ukraine and Russia's delegations hold another round of peace talks. Such sessions are looked to as a way to help make substantial progress in ending the war. Hello, it's good to have you with us at this hour. I'm Daniel Che. Let's begin with our top story. South Korea is prepared to take stern measures against Pyongyang if ICBM tests are conducted. Measures would include deployment of U.S. strategic military assets. The nation's defense ministry concluded the missile North Korea launched last week was not a new type of ICBM. Bae Eun-ji starts us off.
During a closed-door parliamentary session on Tuesday, South Korea's defense ministry reportedly said Seoul and Washington plan to respond using U.S. strategic military assets if the North launches another ICBM. This means that B-52H long-range heavy bombers or B-1B strategic bombers could be deployed on the Korean peninsula. The ministry also provided evidence that the North's missile launched last Thursday was not the Hwasong-17, like the regime claimed. The ministry said it was in fact the Hwasong-15, a model that's older and slightly smaller. First in its report, the ministry said the flight characteristics of the missile, including its speed and engine burn time, indicate that it was a Hwasong-15. And although it may have looked like a Hwasong-17 because it flew longer and higher than the Hwasong-15 launched in 2017, the ministry explained that a detailed analysis shows these data were actually similar to the older model. Second, they said the shadow seen in the video released by the North showing leader Kim Jong-un suggests it was filmed in the morning, sometime between 8 and 10 a.m. But the missile was fired at around 2:30 in the afternoon. Third, the weather. The Sunan area was very cloudy at the time of the launch on March 24th. But in the video released by the North, the sky is perfectly clear. Fourth, the Hwasong-17 is supposed to have 4 nozzles. This requires a much more complicated technology than the Hwasong-15, which has 2 nozzles. The defense ministry noted that just 8 days earlier, the North had attempted to launch a Hwasong-17 that failed and said it wouldn't have had enough time to find out what went wrong. The defense ministry explained that the North probably disguised the launch to send Project Success to its citizens because it's likely that people in Pyongyang saw the missile a week earlier blow up in the air. During the Tuesday's parliamentary session, one congressman said debris of the North's failed Hwasong-17 launch affected civilians in Pyongyang. Ha Tae-kyung of the main opposition party told reporters on Tuesday that debris of the missile rained over the North's capital city, and the explosion was visible to the naked eye. He said although it's unclear if there were any human casualties, it definitely caused some damage. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
North Korea fired an ICBM for the first time in more than 4 years, a clear violation of the UNSC resolutions. The international community is ramping up efforts to respond to the provocation. A defense meeting between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo is slated for Thursday in Hawaii. Song Yoo-jin provides a glimpse of what to expect.
North Korea broke its self-imposed moratorium on long-range missile testing by firing an intercontinental ballistic missile last week. Following the firing, the international community is now looking at possible countermeasures. That includes the Trilateral Chief of Defense meeting between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, which will take place in Hawaii, Thursday, Korea time.
During the trilateral meeting, the chairman of the Republic of Korea Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Won In-cheol, will discuss multilateral cooperation with its U.S. and Japanese counterparts to promote peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia.
During his visit, General Won is also slated to meet with the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, the U.S. Army Pacific Command, the U.S. Pacific Air Force Command, and the U.S. Marine Forces Pacific Command to discuss major agendas such as strengthening the military cooperation between Seoul and Washington. Amid missile threats posed by North Korea, the U.S. has assured it has the power to defend its territory against Pyongyang. Missile Defense Agency Comptroller D.D. Martinez said on Monday that U.S. forces are capable of protecting its territory of Guam against the North's ballistic missiles. Guam is deemed as a strategic hub for the U.S. in maintaining stability in the Indo-Pacific region. Washington is also trying to increase funding to protect its forces on the island, citing rapidly evolving regional threats. The U.S. Defense Ministry has requested $539 million for the fiscal year 2023 to continue developing Guam's defense architecture, which it plans to complete by 2026. Meanwhile, chief nuclear envoys of South Korea and Russia spoke by phone on Tuesday, promising to continue joint efforts to stably manage the situation on the Korean peninsula. South Korea's Noh Kyu-duk asked Moscow to play a constructive role in deterring North Korea from further tension-escalating actions and bringing the reclusive state back to the negotiating table. This comes after Russia, along with China, opposed a UNSC resolution condemning Pyongyang's ICBM launch last week. 송유진, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has called on Japan to correct misleading claims in its school textbooks. Tokyo approved several of them, which make incorrect claims about the Dokdo and Japan's atrocities against Korea. Seoul's foreign ministry made it clear the easternmost islets belong to Korea historically, geographically, and under international law. It also expressed strong regrets over Japan admitting the coercive nature of its wartime sex crimes and forced labor. Seoul urged Tokyo to educate its young people in accordance with the same spirit of sincere apology and self-reflection that Japan had expressed. The ministry summoned a senior official at the Japanese embassy in Seoul to deliver a formal protest. Turning to the latest on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, hoping to achieve substantial progress and end the war, delegations from both sides started a fifth round of talks in Istanbul. For more, we have our Kim Bo-kyung standing by on the line. Bo-kyung, what can you tell us?
Well, Daniel, according to the Embassy of Ukraine in Turkey, the fifth round of Russia-Ukraine negotiations, which were held in person in Istanbul on Tuesday, ended after 4 hours of discussions. Russia and Ukraine had previously held 3 rounds of in-person talks in Belarus, while the fourth session was held virtually. According to the advisor to Ukrainian president and negotiator, the talks were mainly focused on international security guarantees for Ukraine and organizing a ceasefire to resolve humanitarian problems.
Intensive consultations are underway right now on some important issues. The most important is an agreement on international security guarantees for Ukraine, because with this agreement, we will be able to end the war. The second is a ceasefire to solve all the humanitarian problems that have accumulated.
According to RIA Novosti, Russian state-owned domestic news agency, Russian negotiator Vladimir Medinsky said that the talks have been constructive. He added that he received a well-organized stance and will report to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Beforehand, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan addressed the negotiators, saying the talks in Istanbul can pave the way for a Ukraine-Russia leaders' meeting.
The progress you make in negotiations will also make the next level, a meeting between leaders, possible. We are also ready to host such a meeting.
Meanwhile, Turkey's presidential spokesperson said during an interview with CNN that Russia's Donbas and Crimea demands are not realistic, as it is a matter of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. However, Russia's top defense official has said on Tuesday that Russia's primary goal will be to liberate Donbas, while saying that Ukraine's Air Force and anti-aircraft defense system have practically been destroyed.
Well, as you brought up, Bo-kyung, Crimea and Donbas urban combat has continued there for weeks, especially Mariupol. How is the city holding up, and any other parts suffering from Russia's attacks?
Well, according to the mayor of Mariupol on Monday local time, the southeastern Ukrainian port city had largely been under the control of Russian forces. Saying not everything is in our power, the mayor called for an evacuation of the remaining population of Mariupol, estimated to stand at 160,000, as they are without water, electricity, or heat.
Nothing is left. I told you, I live in a bathhouse. I have a small bathhouse and a stove, and that's it. There's no roof, there's nothing.
Russian forces have attacked Ukraine's other southern ports too, including Mykolaiv, where a Russian rocket hit the regional administration building, killing at least 3 people and wounding 22.
The war is causing a potential energy crisis in Europe too. The G7 reached a consensus to reject Russia's demand to pay for gas in rubles, and Moscow says it will make a decision about this.
That's right. Upon Russia's demand for payments for its natural gas exports to be made in rubles, the group of 7 major economies on Monday agreed to reject that demand. That is according to Germany, currently chairing G7. In response, a Kremlin spokesman said that Russia is not going to supply gas for free, saying it is hardly possible and appropriate to engage in charity with European customers, and said it is to make decisions in due course. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, Bo-young, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol held a phone with President Volodymyr Zelensky about ways to help Ukraine. His transition committee announced a list of officials headed for talks in the U.S. as well. Kim Da-mi tells us more.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol spoke on the phone with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at 5 p.m. on Tuesday local time, their first phone call since Yoon was elected. Yoon's office released no immediate details, saying it wouldn't be appropriate with Ukraine currently in a state of war. But it's expected that Zelensky asked the incoming Yoon administration for support against Russia, possibly a specific support plan he's hoping for from Seoul. Yoon has pledged support for Ukraine since he was a presidential candidate, including when he met with the Ukrainian ambassador to South Korea, Dmytro Ponomarenko, earlier this month. Also on Tuesday, Yoon's office finalized the president-elect's delegation to the U.S., who are set to head to Washington early next month for policy consultations with the U.S. government, congressional officials, and experts on the bilateral alliance and security issues.
We will do our best to restore the South Korea-U.S. alliance and maintain our security posture in the face of North Korea's breaking of its moratorium, meaning its nuclear and missile threats.
Headed by Representative Park Jin of Yoon's People Power Party, the 7-member delegation includes a former Vice Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yong, also Chung Jae-ho, a professor of political science and international relations at Seoul National University, Park Chul-hee, a professor of SNU Graduate School of International Studies, Pyo Se-woo, former defense attaché at the South Korean Embassy in Washington, Yeon Won-ho, a researcher at the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, and Kang In-sun, the president-elect's spokesperson for the foreign press. Also the same day, the Asahi Shimbun reported that the president-elect has decided to dispatch a policy council to Japan, composed of lawmakers and Japan experts around the time Yoon takes office on May 10th. The decision reportedly came out of Yoon's meeting on Monday with the Japanese ambassador to Seoul, Koichi Aiboshi. The group will reportedly be looking to sit down for talks with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to discuss Seoul-Tokyo relations and foreign policy and security issues. Yoon's transition committee, however, denied the report about Japan, saying they're still working on delegations to other countries. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
The president-elect spokesperson made largely positive remarks regarding the meeting between the incoming and outgoing leaders. Yoon's transition committee reportedly looks forward to Moon's cooperation along the way leading up to inauguration. Lee Kyung-un has the full story.
Despite much anticipation, there were no specific agreements reached in Monday's meeting between President Moon Jae-in and President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol. But Yoon's spokesperson said it was still a meaningful event, as the two are said to have agreed on the need for cooperation on key issues like COVID-19 relief for businesses and national security, details of which are set to be sorted out in working-level talks in the future.
The incumbent president and president-elect holding hands together and having such discussions has a meaning as it alleviates the public's worries.
Yoon's transition committee also welcomed President Moon's willingness for cooperation. Committee Chair An Chul-soo said that cooperation will help pick up the pace of the transition and allow key plans to be carried out smoothly. And regarding the task of stabilizing the overheated housing market, one of the biggest concerns among South Koreans, An said that the committee will refrain from limiting itself to one particular option, citing the failure of the current government whose housing policies were centered on regulations only.
We must look through the fundamental cause of an issue and the policy needed to solve that problem. We will need to find the perfect balance between regulation and incentives.
This comes as the Transition Committee finishes hearing policy briefings from 53 agencies on Tuesday, and will get started with laying out a preliminary list of Yoon's government agenda next week.
President-elect Yoon told us to make pragmatism and the interests of the public the primary focus of government agendas and to find a solution for adapting to dynamic changes in the world.
As the directions of the Yoon administration starts to take shape, the nominee for Prime Minister is likely to be announced in early April. That is to make sure the nominee goes through the parliamentary hearing and can actually start working as soon as Yoon takes office. 이경은, 아리랑 뉴스.
Local health authorities believe the country has passed the peak of this wave of COVID-19. They're set to review easing distancing rules next week. The daily virus tally was a little under 350,000 as of Tuesday midnight. Choi Min-jung has the latest.
South Korea on Tuesday reported 347,554 new COVID-19 infections. Daily cases were slightly down by around 6,400 on week. With the country now having passed the Omicron peak, authorities forecast daily infections to drop to less than 300,000 within the next 2 weeks and below 200,000 within a month. With this outlook in mind, officials are considering relaxing current social distancing rules, which are set to last until this Sunday. Currently, gatherings of up to 8 people are allowed, and most businesses must close by 11 p.m. Authorities say there's a chance of cases spiking if restrictions are all eased at once, but they have been gradually easing restrictions.
Now is the time to encourage people's voluntary efforts rather than imposing strict measures.
There are also plans to expand treatment options for COVID-19 patients recovering at home.
The treatment of outpatients, which was mainly handled by medical centers specializing in respiratory diseases, will now be expanded to other hospitals and clinics as well.
Infected people who wish to receive face-to-face treatment can visit clinics and hospitals after making a reservation. This is allowed even if they are under quarantine. However, medication must be picked up by someone who doesn't have COVID-19. To prevent infections at clinics and hospitals, officials say they will have separate diagnosis times and areas for COVID patients. Meanwhile, severe cases remain high with over 1,200 people in critical condition. There were 237 additional deaths. Authorities have said that these figures could peak in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Experts predict the number of severely ill patients to reach somewhere between 1,300 and 1,680 at its peak. The figure is then expected to drop sometime in April. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
With around 1 out of 5 South Koreans infected with the Omicron variant, there are more households where all family members caught the virus. The biggest challenge for these groups, with everyone quarantined, who will pick up their prescription medicine from pharmacies? Shin-yeon sheds light on this issue.
Authorities have been tweaking their antivirus measures to effectively curb the spread of COVID-19. To stop the surge of Omicron, they've introduced at-home recovery measures. But many questions have popped up as more and more of the population become infected with the virus, especially in households where all family members have been infected. In these situations, the most common question is whether an infected person can pick up their own prescription medicine. The answer is no, because the rule of thumb is that only those that aren't infected can do so. But what if there isn't anybody who can pick up the medication? Especially in cases when all family members are infected, or the only ones not infected are young children. To that, authorities said prescription drugs can be delivered to the doorstep of those recovering from home. But each local government will have their own methods in place. Some regions have designated agencies to deliver medication from pharmacies, while other regions have set aside staff from medical clinics to deliver the medication themselves. With methods differing depending on location, those recovering at home can call up their nearest hospital or pharmacy for information on how they can receive their medication. Another important question is who pays for the medicine. Those that have tested positive through a rapid antigen test done at hospitals or clinics or a PCR test will not have to pay for the medicine. There have been cases where some pharmacies unfamiliar with the cost processing procedure have charged people who have been confirmed with the virus. But in this situation, people can ask for a full refund. Another potential problem is when parents or essential caregivers have been infected but not their children. If their children report suspected symptoms, though, can they go to a hospital or clinic alone and receive medical examination or treatment? The short answer is no. Parents can accompany their child to the hospital using their own car or just by walking there. But the parent must inform the hospital they're visiting that they've been infected and abide by all virus prevention measures, including wearing a KF94 mask at all times and returning straight home after the medical checkup. 신예은, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now. According to a review of regulations by travel agency Hana Tour, people traveling from South Korea can now enter 39 countries without having to self-isolate on arrival. Children can do the same in 35 countries. Among these countries, travelers from Korea can enter 26 of them without being vaccinated. The majority of these nations with the relaxed rules are in Europe and include Britain, France, as well as Switzerland. But some still require negative COVID-19 test results, rather. Starting next month, Malaysia is expected to join the list as well. The pandemic has had an enormous impact on people's lives. Recent research shows South Korean workers' loans went up, while older adults have been more likely to suffer from mental health issues. Min Suk-hyun helps us look beyond the figures.
During the first year of the virus outbreak in South Korea, the average amount borrowed in loans by those in employment rose by more than 10% on year, the largest increase ever recorded. According to Statistics Korea on Tuesday, as of the end of 2020, the average loan amount of South Korean workers was around $40,000, up 10.3% on year. The growth rate was much higher than the 5.6% increase in 2019. The increase was mostly attributed to more credit loans, which jumped over 19%, as well as more non-housing mortgage loans, which climbed almost 16%. Mortgage loans only inched up 1.6%. Statistics Korea explained that the COVID-19 outbreak, the country's low interest rate, and increased investments on rallying stock markets led to an overall surge in loans. But the seemingly endless pandemic has not only affected loans, but also people's mental health. Research shows that the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has made it more likely for older adults to suffer from depression. In fact, it says the risk of developing depression in adults, particularly those aged 60 or over, has doubled since the pandemic, even for the senior citizens who have no history of depression.
It had only been expected, but now it's been scientifically proven that older adults are at greater risk of depression following social gathering bans and strict COVID-19 measures. In fact, among OECD member states, South Korea has the highest elderly suicide rate. This problem may worsen, so it's time to take action.
Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
South Korea will be mostly cloudy with scattered outbreaks of rain tomorrow. Showers will start from Jeju Island in the morning and they will spread across the entire nation by the daytime. Most inland regions will see about 5 to 10 millimeters of rainfall. Gangwon-do province and Jeju Island will see up to 20 millimeters. And by the evening, mountainous regions of Gangwon-do province will see rain turning into snow. Air quality will stand in the normal to good category nationwide. Also, dense layers of fog will build up across inland regions tomorrow. Visibility is forecast to drop to below 1 kilometer, so please be extra careful out on the roads. Those near the coastlines of the south and the west should be extra alert as layers of fog will be heavier. Partly cloudy to overcast skies are expected for the morning hours. Seoul and Gwangju will start off at 7 degrees. As for the daily highs, Seoul will get up to 16 degrees. Daejeon 18, Gyeongju and Busan will reach 21 degrees. Most of the rain will ease off by Thursday morning, and after the rain, temperatures will drop to below the seasonal norms. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all from us. As always, thank you for watching.